Hi, excuse my voice, I hope that you will hear me okay. I'm Zoe Svensson, I'm a research fellow in drama and performance in the English faculty at the University of Cambridge. And I run a performing arts company called Metis. Metis, the name comes from a Greek goddess, the mother of Athena, who is a shapeshifter and the goddess of cutting and know-how. And I think it's kind of appropriate for what's going on in this 36 hours. So I actually want to pose a question quite specifically about a project that we're starting to make. But it's around the idea of how might you generate data within an art project. So I know a lot of what's happening over this 36 hours is related to data that is generated by organisations through audience figures and other kinds of organisational data. But what happens when actually the projects that you make generate data, and what could happen to that data? Where could it go? How can interactive performances capture the audience response and use it? And I'm just going to describe a little bit about the project that we've done over the past couple of years, which is called Third Ring Out, which uses a combination of Arduino and Isadora software to capture voting within the project electronically and to record the data. I imagine everyone in this room is familiar with Isadora. Yeah? So I won't explain what I won't explain it. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of the video to show the project. So we toured these two bright orange shipping containers around the UK in 2010 and 2011. And what takes place inside is a simulation of a climate crisis in 2033. And the audience are kind of cast as emergency planners who have to deal with the issues that arise in the course of this crisis.
To the following safety instructions. Should it be necessary?
So we have this bespoke space, which we created as a bit of sort of TARDIS-like, so it's like smart office inside, which actually the casing hides an enormous amount of kit, an enormous amount of cables and different computers and stuff, which all link up together. I'm just going to take this a little bit further forward. So in front of each of the audience members is a pair of headphones and a voting console. So they have three options. So it's a bit like a kind of multimedia choose your own adventure book. So we deliberately did created quite a simple system. And depending on what you voted for, the majority vote went through, and that changed the course of the outcomes of what happened in the crisis. But what we didn't do, we weren't trying to kind of simulate a computer game or a video game sort of, but rather we were working on the concept of rehearsal or practicing. And it came from investigating Cold War exercises where the government would organise around 17,000 people all to go into about 1,500 bunkers across the country, all to pretend that a nuclear war was happening, and they would kind of gather data and phone through to other bunkers where they would plot it on maps, and then from that they'd coordinate rescue responses. And we were fascinated as theatre makers by how these practices operate, and I mean, Category 1 responders now do a lot of it. Operate in other domains where it's not about leisure or entertainment, but about actually going through the motions of trying something out. So what we were interested in was to also to capture how people responded. So we didn't have hundreds and hundreds of different possible votes. It didn't kind of go out like a tree where if you voted for one thing, then you'd have to go through a whole series of completely different votes. What you voted for changed the results of what happened, but you would quite often then be asked to vote on something else that another group would also have been asked to, whatever they'd voted for the previous one. But it meant that there were about 492 different possible routes through the whole scenario. So there was genuine difference between all the different ways in which it could go. But at the same time, there was the potential for comparing how people responded. So I just take you a bit further in. I'll just show you a little bit about how the sort of simulation operated. So we used video.
Waste, weather or warming
It was all pre-recorded.
Now, as you can tell behind me, I'm here at near the main body of the demonstration that's going on. It's quite an event, I can tell you.
Civil order. The police are being deployed to the area where demonstrations are taking place. Please open your drawer. Take out.
So everyone had little icons they had to place on the map.
At the point illuminated in order to contain the demonstration.
A request there from our regional cell asking us to absorb 752 climate refugees. Now these people are originally from the Noakhali district of Bangladesh and they've lost their homes due to repeated flooding. They have been travelling through the night and they have been travelling, moved around from place to place. The question is, do we accept them into our sector? Please, if you would, make your decision now.
So you only have limited time to make your decision.
And the result is not to accept the refugees. I shall let the relevant authorities.
It is now 0800 hours on the 8th of July, 2033.
So, that meant we could capture how people responded. So you could then go online and look at how everybody in your cell had, what other decisions being made. So there was quite a lot of the feedback that we got that was interesting was people being shocked or pleased about how the whole cell had voted, suddenly discovering that you're sitting there voting for things and other people weren't thinking the same way as you. So it sort of opened up that question of the collective experience of a theatrical experience. And David Russell from Outfusion did what I would call a hack, I guess, for us, which was that he took that data and turned it into a web interface which anyone can go and use. To look at how different people voted. And you can choose, we captured age and gender of the participants. So you can select different options to look at how different people voted. So, for example, in terms of accepting the question about climate refugees, you can hear that older people over 45, or claim they were over 45, were much more willing to accept the refugees than the younger people. So the youngest age group were somewhat worried by climate refugees. However, when it came to there's a point later on in the simulation, which is all, so the questions operate within a narrative context. So there's a situation in which there are too many people stuck in the sector and they haven't got anywhere to go, and there's lots of people who've left the sector because they're wealthy and they've got homes elsewhere, and so they've left there, they've gone away. And so this question about squatting came up. And as you can see, young people were very keen on the idea of occupying other people's homes, but possibly because people between 25 and 45 are more likely to own their own homes, they were much less keen. Similarly, if you're over 45, you're more engaged with the idea of having military support if rioting is happening, compared with if you're under 25. Now, these we created this before the riots last August. So when we were trying to decide what to do, the notion of considering the military in the streets, it seemed really out there as a kind of going, was that realistic enough, 2033? Would people really be thinking in that way? And then when the riots happened, we were like, no, we don't want to be predicting the future this way. This is not good. we were predicting it much further into the future. So actually quite a lot of the things that we were imagining in this simulation in 2033 have happened in the time since we first made the project. So now we're moving on to a new project, which we're just in the process of creating the system, which we're calling the fencing project because it's inspired by the technology in which the hits in fencing are captured. And the players compete to be the first to touch 5 zones on the body, and we're using, here actually we're using sensors, but now we're using Oyster card technology which is sort of embedded in costumes. And the players have to compete to be the first to touch 5 zones on the body. And we're looking at the relationship between sport and art, choreography, and the idea of beauty and the notion of what you need to do to win. So it's kind of all about different forms of intentionality. But what I'll just show you a little bit of, hang on, that does. It's also about the body and the machine. So the computer controls the event. Got some nice computer voices. So that little game is at the heart of a much bigger project idea, I'd say, at the moment, because it's not a final performance yet. I mean, it probably will become a durational installation eventually. But it's so we work by creating a system and then working out how different inputs and different outputs create a kind of aesthetic experience. And one of the things we're looking at is we've been inviting people to give advice about winning and losing and then feeding that back to the performers. So one of the performers might get a constant kinds of advice about how to help them keep winning, and the other might be getting kind of, we asked the question, what would you say to someone if you wanted them to lose? And we got a whole load of responses, and then we were feeding them in, and then you can see what happens. So what the question, as I said at the beginning, is really what kind of data could we generate using the system? What could we reveal about the players? So one of the things we were thinking about was the speed at which the zones on the body are captured, or whether one player always manages to capture one of the zones first and the other ones, and whether there was a way of doing a hack that would start to visualize that, and whether that could be categorized in a way that could make there be an automatic computer response producing certain kinds of advice that might come back to the player. So this notion of influencing the actions of the players as a result. And then we're sort of actually interested in this notion of creating an independent artwork, that you might start with the bodies in a space generating the data, and then what potentially could happen is that the data might be turned into something that then could inhabit the space, and perhaps you'll just leave the harnesses behind, and actually the audience or people coming to visit the installation might be able to take over and operate it themselves in some way. So I'm aware of the time, and I'm not around that much over the course of the weekend because I've got a very small baby, and I've only been able to get an hour of childcare today. So I hope to be back tomorrow afternoon when everyone's presenting. But if anyone has any thoughts or ideas, I would be really interested to hear. And do I have time for any questions now? Like 1 minute, 2 minutes. I mean, does anything spring to mind immediately, or does anyone have any questions about it? Yeah.
Have you thought about putting feedback in the harnesses? So, say you know someone always goes to the shoulder.
Yeah.
You could sort of introduce a new rule where they've sort of got a vibration on the knee.
Right.
If their knee vibrates, they have to go to the knee.
Knee. Okay. Yeah.
Actually force the play, and the person they're playing against.
So you mean that the community would decide what, based on the previous actions of the player, that the computer would decide what had to happen next. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, imagine sort of glowing zones that would sort of appear.
Yeah, but obviously, if someone knows they have to go to the knee, but the other person doesn't know that,
right?
Then there's various ways to approach that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So one of the things we're doing is capturing the sort of improvisations that result. We've been working since that first process with dancers on video, and then getting them to learn the choreography from that, and then turning that into a kind of tactical move. So this notion of moving away from just the aim to win to some kind of notion of the choreograph. But it also means that it's very frustrating for the other player if something's been set up where that particular bit of choreography enables the other player to actually get closer in a way. So there's sort of notion about this harness being a physical harness as well. So that kind of plays to that really nicely. Yeah. That's also, we haven't yet, but that's also a possibility. You mean using a kind of sensitive... Oh, using motion capture. Yeah. And but how would you be able to then use that? I don't know.
We've got JAG-X
and Sony developers here today, so they use motion capture a lot.
Yeah.
And they might be able to. I can make an introduction.
I know, that'd be really interesting. I've used motion capture with Max MSP with dancers, but in a relatively simple and kind of not particularly new way. But that would be really interesting to kind of map. But also the visualizations of the mapping of where people moved would be, I think, could be interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Ready? Okay, my name is Chris. I'm employed by ARM, but my main work is on the Embed platform. And my intention for the next 10 minutes is just to tell you a little bit about the background and what it's all about. So, to give you a background of where the inspiration come from, back in 2005, myself and one of my colleagues got together to look at the problems that we were facing when doing sort of educational outreach. So I was doing lots of work with secondary schools, and my colleague was doing lots of work with universities. And we was essentially taking equipment that, ARM as a sort of professional software and hardware development company would sell as products. And it just wasn't appropriate for an educational audience. So we decided we wanted to build something that was a bit more appropriate, and that led us to the Embed platform. One of the key turning points was realizing that if we tried to sell this internally as a sort of for education charity case, it would be the first thing that would be shot and killed off in harsh times. So we decided to do some research and see how to make it commercially viable. Now, the result of that research was to realize that actually education isn't just about people in classrooms, it's about people learning new things. Whether they're in university, or whether in their sixth form, or even if they're professional engineers who are working inside companies trying to get their job done. By realizing that, we decided to actually go and tackle the wider problems of the industry, not just education. And this has been great because it's given us a mandate to shake things up, certainly inside ARM, more so inside the industry as time progresses, but it's also given us a great platform that we can push back into the sort of educational arena. So a little bit about the background. So when we did our research, we had a look at what was going on in the world of microcontrollers. And the first observation is they were becoming cheap. So if you wind the clock back 10 years ago, a 32-bit microcontroller was probably prohibitively expensive if you was designing a product. As silicon technology has progressed, the dominant cost of a microchip these days is actually the size of the memory, the flash and the RAM. The rest of the stuff that goes around it is almost neither here nor there. So for a given price point or a given memory footprint, you may as well have 32-bit performance. And this has led us to a point where you can now get a Cortex M3, which is one of our newer microcontroller architecture chips, for around about $1. And the newer ones that are coming out on the market sort of around about 30 cents. So this means that there's no longer a price barrier to designing this sort of technology into really, really cheap sort of mass market products. Second observation was about the power of these microcontrollers. So we've got lots of processing power, lots of memory, lots of I/O, and it's all in one package. Now, it's impossible to solder package, but we'll come on to that later. So these chips are 100 megahertz plus, up to half a mega flash, 256K of SRAM. So they really do pack a punch in terms of what you can achieve with them. And the other point is about interactivity. So a lot of the interfaces that you're finding on these microcontrollers are the sort of things that would interact with the technology in your pocket. So you find microcontrollers with Ethernet on board, microcontrollers with 2.4 gig radios, microcontrollers with USB host and device. And all of these features means that these very, very cheap chips can now interact with the sort of thing that you see around you. And we believed at that time that these three things together meant that there's a load of new opportunities for microcontrollers that people probably wouldn't have considered before. But there's always a downside, and the downside is, well, how do you get this technology into people's hands? So one of the things we realized was in the old world, professional embedded developers would be designing new products, but they're not always the people that see the problems. In fact, in our original pitch, we had this great slide with glove puppets. The guy on the left was a pig farmer, and the guy on the right was an embedded engineer. And our assertion was that the embedded engineer would never dream of making an automated pig feeder because he didn't see the problem. But if you can give the technology to the pig farmer in a way that he can apply it to his own problems, well, then he can have a 6 o'clock lay-in on a Sunday morning because he can solve the problem.
And here, I kind of add, if we can give it for the arts organisations who are here, they can solve their own problems.
Yes. So it's about picking up technology and applying it to your own problem rather than relying on sort of industry professionals. But the electronics industry hadn't really changed. It was this nightmare of unnecessary complexity and timescales. So if you see what has gone in the worlds of 3D molding, 20 years ago, if you wanted a plastic case, you had to hire a tool maker, and it's thousands of pounds and 8 weeks lead time. Well, now with a CAD package and a 3D printer, you can knock one out in a couple of hours. Regular printing, CAD CAM, even web frameworks. You don't write in HTML anymore. You download your favorite web framework, and you can have an application running in a morning. But the electronics hadn't kept pace, so we felt that there was an opportunity for rapid prototyping with microcontrollers. So the platform we eventually come up with, this embed.org platform, I personally like to think of it as greater than the sum of the parts. So we have a sort of dedicated developer website. So we're not a marketing site, no one's going to be advertised at. We're just literally there to try and help people be more productive with technology. One of the novel things that we've done is we've actually put all the compilation tools online. So you compile in your browser. So you go to embed.org, you open up a compiler window. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're running Linux, Mac, Windows. It even works on a Raspberry Pi, as it happens. As long as you've got a web browser, you have a compiler. And it is actually a professional compiler. It's the same compiler that you would have your hands on if you bought sort of ARM's professional tools. It just so happens it's got a web interface. The next thing that we did was thinking about abstraction and high-level peripheral interfaces. So if you're just trying to experiment with technology, you really don't care about the grisly details that's going below the API. You just want to do what's intuitive for the interface you want to use. So if you want to hook up a sensor that has, say, for instance, an I2C interface, you don't care about how messy and ugly the protocol is. You just want to send and receive bytes. And that's the sort of level of abstraction we've done. But we was very careful to do it in a way that you're not bound to that. So if you decide that you don't want to use these high-level APIs, and if you think that assembler really is your bag, then fill your boots. Personally, I think life's too short, but it takes all sorts. Last but not least is the prototyping form factor. So we've taken one of these impossible-to-solder chips and put it on a board, which can go into a breadboard. 0.1-inch pitch is awesome. You can plug it in, you can solder to it, and you can experiment with it. So it's all about being able to plug things in and experiment. So I'm going to attempt the impossible/stupid and actually give you a live demo. So this is another part of what I think is made the technology accessible. And it was one of the requirements for actually getting this into classrooms. So the fact that our compiler tools are in a web browser, there's a reason for that. It's because when you go into a school to do a workshop, you can't install anything. Web pages is about all you can get. And same for hooking up bits of hardware to their laptops. So the only thing that students are expected to do is insert flash drives. So we thought it'd be really great if when you plugged in a microcontroller, what it actually did was appear as a mass storage device, which, if Windows, there we go. So when I plug in my microcontroller, it just pops up as a flash drive. And it really is just a flash drive. But this also means that it runs under Windows, Linux and Macs, and even Raspberry Pis, because it is just a file system. We follow the file that's on there, if the internet is going to be kind to me. I've been testing the Wi-Fi on and off for the last hour just to make sure it didn't fail on me, but fortunes haven't smiled. Do we have wires, maybe?
You might want to just
Okay. Oh, does it? So Google's always the test. If you've got Google is the internet. If you've got Google, you've got the internet. I don't have the internet. I'm not going to get too bogged down here. I'll go to plan B. So when you plug in your embed micro, it comes up as a flash drive. You open up the HTML file and you get a very light login screen. It just asks you for email address, that sort of thing. We've given you lots of resources just to get you going. So one of the things we noticed with our early experiments in classrooms is if you've got to type a bunch of stuff for an hour and then you press go and it doesn't work, then you're pretty cheesed off. If you can get that first win really, really quickly, then people are willing to invest more time. So you plug it in, you get to this website, you download your first binary, and hopefully you should have an LED flashing away within literally just a couple of minutes, which I would have shown you if I had an internet. Now, LEDs aren't all that exciting, but you'll be surprising how inspiring they are. So the next step is to go off to the compiler, which we see linked up there. Oh, yeah, okay.
On this one.
Yeah, that's the one.
Can I ask, where does this sit on sort of the Arduino Raspberry Pi?
That's a very good question that we've discussed at length. Yeah, we had a discussion about Arduino, Raspberry Pi, things like BeagleBoard and Mbed. So obviously Raspberry Pi and BeagleBoard, those class, I mean, they're applications class processors. They run Linux, you know, they have MMUs, they have, you know, hundreds of megabytes of memory. This is much closer to Arduino in as much that it's definitely a microcontroller, there's no MMU, it doesn't have hundreds of megabytes of memory.
You are off.
Sorry?
That's not it's not. It's just being slow.
Oh, okay, cool. But the processor behind it is, I'd say, a different order of magnitude. So behind an Arduino, it's an 8-bit micro running at, say, 16 megahertz. This is a 32-bit Cortex M3. It runs at 108 megahertz or whatever it is. So it's, you know, you can do software MP3 decode on it if you wish. So it's a sort of, yes, it's quite a leap in terms of capability, but it's certainly not trying to encroach on the lands of running Linux and having an MMU, that sort of thing. Okay, so I'm not going to register because it turns out I already have an account. Actually, I have several. But I can't remember the password for any of them, apparently. Yay. Okay, so the first thing I would do as a new user, maybe, is download the Hello World binary here. And I can save it straight onto my flash drive because it is just a flash drive. You can see the little light flashing as we go. This is obviously the money shot because when I press the go button, yeah, crowd go wild. So that's how it would have been a couple of minutes just to plug this thing in and say, well, actually, I'm kind of in control of it because look, it's working. So obviously, there's room in life for more than one LED. So let's maybe do two. So we'd go to our online tools. As you can see, we're doing a project with Vodafone. So the first thing we'd do is, say, create a new program. And it always gives you a program framework. Now, it's coded in sort of C, C++. It is actually C++, but we're keeping it very lightweight, so there's no standard template libraries. So you can write an assembler if you have time on your hands, or, of course, if you actually need it. You'll see it's a very, very stripped-down version of an IDE, so you have features like sort of compile, save. We're not giving you any options about compilation, flags, that sort of thing. We decided that we wanted to give everyone sort of common context. So one of the things we identified in the days of the BBC is that all the classrooms in the land had the same thing on their desks, which means they could share a lot of things because there was a lot of shared context. So the hardware, there's no jumper options. There's nothing for you to get wrong. There's nothing to choose in the compiler. So any program that runs on your embed will run on any other embed in the world, which means that the community can support themselves so they can help each other because they have a common context. So if I want to do something crazy, maybe do a different LED. No, not 5, 4. Know how you can never type when one person watches over your shoulder. It's kind of like that, but bigger. So it is just C in a browser, which means if I compile a program that has errors in it, B and C, obviously it likes its... I wasn't expecting that one. Yeah, I'm going to give this up as a bad job. Okay. I'll go back to PowerPoint. So imagine you compile a program successfully, you sort of hit the reset button and off it goes. So that's kind of an overview of what the technology is about, or where it came from and why we think it's different. So just in terms of a summary. So this is all born from the fact that we think there's a big opportunity for the applications. This is whether you're learning about it in schools or whether you're trying to implement this professionally. And it's all about getting started and rapid prototyping. So this isn't the sort of thing that people would take into a product. It would be the sort of thing that someone gets going so that they can get buy-in from their boss or have the confidence to invest more in it to take it to the next step. So it's all about trying out new ideas, new technologies, and about making it accessible, because unless you can let people sort of consume it and use it and interact with it, they're always going to be a little bit scared of it. And we say it's a tool that you need to use when you experiment. So we're finding a lot of engineers inside ARM who originally didn't take it seriously. Well, actually now they turn to this as their first port of call to prove an idea. And once it's proven, they migrate. And it's really about broad appeal. Like I say, it's not focused at any one particular group. It's about people who want to learn and have a play. my colleagues use it, experienced engineers use it. People who are engineers that are stuck in the past maybe and want to take that step forward, yeah, they've found it quite good. So are there any questions about any of that?
I was wondering what inputs and outputs you had on there, and do you have like shields and add-ons, and how do I connect my bits?
Okay, so we don't have the shield concept for various reasons. We saw lots of these things called like E-blocks where there's a fixed interface. And we believe that as soon as you nail down what the hardware interface looks like, a particular set of connectors, then you've immediately made it impossible for anyone to do anything else. And we kind of believe that actually it's the software that's the hard bit, not just wiring up a few bits of wires. So, I mean, you have breadboards, you can solder stuff up. That's generally not the hard bit. The hard bit is writing a Ethernet stack, for instance. In terms of what's actually on this device, so it's got a whole bunch of analog ins, it's got an analog out, pulse width modulation, CAN bus, I2C, SPI. It's got a high quality I2S, like an audio DAC interface. It's got USB host, USB device, Ethernet, all on that one device. So it's, it packs a fair punch. What we did is we chose the most fully loaded part that we could that had everything on it, so that you've got everything available. So if you wanted to go to a product, then you'd strip down and choose the one that is cheaper and still suits. And there's also books available on this as well now, I'm pleased to say.
What sort of things do people build in a typical classroom exercise?
I mean, bearing in mind that the main audience for this isn't education, so lots of people do lots of random things. I mean, there are course notes, there's a published set of course notes that show people how to make accelerometer-based spirit levels and all sorts of other bits and pieces. The interesting applications, or the applications that interest me are the ones where the industry itself are using them. So I was at a trade show earlier this year where there was a very conservative engineering company who said that they had a lab full of these things, and it wasn't because they was using for their product development, but they was using it as a very cheap way to generate CAN bus patterns for doing testing. So people use them for all sorts of things. And there are a stack of them over in the other room if someone wants to have a fiddle. Thank you.
We are currently associate artists at Anglia Ruskin. We've been here since last year on a public art commission. Part of that is something I'll talk about in a minute, which we just showed an extract of outside. I'm just going to very quickly talk about kind of who we are and our approaches to technology, performance, theatre, art, I guess, on a wide level. We are a sort of loose-ish collective. We've been working as independent artists for many years, and in the last year we kind of decided that we'd collaborated on everything so much together that we wanted to work under one name. So we now work as Circumstance. And part of this is kind of maybe slightly moving away from the cult of the individual in arts practice, but also it allows us to bring in different people and work with different groups all the time. I traditionally come from a sort of background of early interactive arts, lots of, triggers and sensors and all those kind of things, looking at generative work, and then sort of shifted more and more back towards authored work. I think we, as makers, have a real sort of belief in the power of the author and the power of having something to say in the work you're making and trying to think about technology in that way. We, although we're very geeky and techie in our sort of approaches, we don't make, I would say, online work. We do use networks a lot of the time, but we don't make work for the internet or for screens for various reasons. One of those is an interest in experience and in physical experiences in what we call uncontrolled spaces. We used to say we make work in public space, and we're really focused on that. We don't make work in venues or galleries, but public space has become a sort of contentious term where especially for me in the UK, you have all these areas that are made to look like public space. They have benches and grass and all these things, but they actually quite often are privately owned, and you can get kicked off them for doing anything if they don't want you to be there. So now we say we make work in uncontrolled space, and by that I guess I mean environments where we don't know what could happen. We try and make work that allows space for the rest of the world to happen in it. So the kind of works we make, we use technologies mainly that people already have in their pockets. Sometimes we do very kind of custom-built works, and we do work from a very sort of ground-up level, but a lot of the time we're kind of just saying, okay, what are the tools that people have already got? And we do that partly because, A, they've already got the tools, so we don't need to provide all the technology, and it makes budgets a lot cheaper. But also because there's an underlying belief in our work that mobile technology specifically has done this great thing of enabling us to connect to remote places and remote people and remote environments, but at the same time it's sort of begun to distance us from things that are right next to us, from the people that are around us, from the physical spaces we're in. So a lot of the time we've been trying to rethink these technologies and hack them and reuse them in ways that force people to connect with what's right next to them and what's around them. So a couple of the types of work we make something called a subtle mob quite a lot, which is a sort of invisible flash mob. And the idea is that flash mobs are great. I'm sort of talking here just assuming that everyone knows what a flash mob is. Yeah? So the sort of thing where a load of people gather at a train station and stand still, or there's a sort of simultaneous dance in a big street somewhere. It's a sort of instantaneous gathering of a lot of people to do something. And for us, a lot of those some of them are very beautiful, a lot of them have become quite commercialized now and are used by advertising agencies a lot. But for me, the issue was always that more people watch them on YouTube than actually take part in them. And we, without wanting to use quite trite expressions, we wanted to make something where you really had to be there. So we make these experiences which are a soundtrack that you download on an MP3. The soundtrack's a mixture of music and instruction and narrative and story. So sometimes you're being told to do really simple things, look at your reflection in a mirror, put your hand on someone's shoulder. You have this beautiful cinematic soundtrack that we've written that's sort of evocative and moving. And then you're also told, you're described these scenes, stories that are happening around you. And the idea is that we've actually sent out a number of different MP3s. So while some half of the audience are following an instruction and being told to look at their reflection in a window, the other half of the audience are being told this story about someone looking at their reflection in the window. And then everywhere they start looking around them, they see this story playing out in real life. So the listeners and the audience kind of become performers in this film. And this idea of making cinema is something that we're always really interested in. Cinema in the everyday world, because people think of things on screens and things in the cinema as magical and amazing. And we think the everyday is pretty magical and amazing, and you just need to frame it that way. So we write music and scores and create experiences that try and make the everyday into something magical. That works on MP3s. We have no control over the event. Once we tell people when to press play, we say, be in this part of the city. There's no meeting point, there's just an area. Be in this part of the city, press play at this time, and people follow the instructions quite a lot, surprisingly. We've done this with over 1,000 people. We try and still keep it invisible. Sometimes it becomes noticeable, but if you spread it out over a large enough area, you don't know what's going on. We also work we do a lot of work with kind of communication technology, partially because of the intimacy of the phone call and the intimacy of the voice in the ear. And I think even though we've had phones for over a century, we've had Walkmans for a quarter of a century, I still think we don't quite understand the complexities of the remote voice, of what it means to hear a voice from somewhere else as intimately as a lover would whisper into your ear. And I don't think we understand the complexities of hearing a recorded voice when we're sort of being told about where we are right now, but we know this voice was recorded in the past, so they're not here, but they seem to be describing things that are around us. And museum guides and all these kind of works use this technique, and I think there's still a big area to be sort of understood in what you can do with that, both sort of psychologically and emotionally. We do a lot of work with walking and movement because in a sort of fast culture, as Francis Solis said, walking is almost a kind of resistance, this idea of moving slowly and only moving at the speed you can move with your body. I've said all that. We're not quite sure how we define ourselves. We're not quite sure whether we would sit in a theatrical context. I think we make theatre works, but that's just because I like saying I'm a theatre director. I think it sounds cool, but most of our theatrical friends wouldn't agree with us. At heart, we're musicians and composers. I'm going to move on very quickly to where we're at with this piece. So what we've been making here is a big change for us. This is a piece on speakers, which you would have just heard outside. You've just heard a small extract of it. It's called Of Sleeping Birds, and the idea was twofold. One was we wanted to make a walk through Cambridge because we did a number of the tourist guided tours in Cambridge, and some of them, no, all of them, I think, just focus on the old city and the sort of the colleges. And for us, there was a lot more to Cambridge than that area. And just crossing the city for us took you through an incredible amount of different, both physical spaces but social spaces as well. And we made our own guided tour of Fitzroy Street and Burley Street and the Grafton Centre. I don't know if anyone's been there, but we can provide you a wonderful guided tour of that area if you're not interested in the colleges. And we wanted to make a walk that crossed through the city, and we wanted to move away from headphones, and we became interested in working with speakers and working with this idea of multiple speakers, and the interactivity of the work becoming the movement of the audience. So what happens in this piece, the speakers that you've seen, we have in the full version, which opens next week, and I'll do all the promotion and marketing in 2 minutes and 20 seconds. In the full version of the piece, it's 40 speakers. Each one is given to an audience member. They're GPS controlled, so each one plays its sound based on where it is physically in the city. So we've written a score that is basically designed for different parts of the city, different architectures, different spaces. And also we've separated that score out across the speakers. So one speaker might be a voice, one might be a violin, one might be a distorted piano. I'm obsessed with distorting pianos at the moment. And the audience are guided in 4 different groups through the city. So these groups kind of cross over with each other. So you get this sort of moving orchestra through the streets the sound is mixed and the piece is mixed by both how quickly they move from region to region, how spaced out they are as a group, how they decide to move the speakers because they reflect off the walls and the surfaces. And also there's dialogue between the different groups. So there's points in the piece where you're on Christ's piece. There's a lot of pieces in that sentence. And there might be another group on the other side of it, and there are sounds kind of calling and responding across from one group to the other. And so you eventually get here, and all 40 speakers are laid out into a semi-sound installation that will end. This one doesn't end because we just set it to loop for this afternoon, but hopefully it ends. Actually, we did a test. It didn't quite finish. It may be an eternal piece. Sorry, Chris, you might have a permanent sound work playing in the courtyard. So that's all I'll say about that, apart from the fact that it's on next week from Monday to Saturday, every night at 8:30 p.m. If you want to sign up, visit obsleepingbirds.com. And if you want to volunteer to help us manage the piece, or you know anyone that might want to volunteer, well, there's a few places we still need some help with. And that's all I'll say right now, and we can take questions. We can take a question, or two really short ones. Or asleep.
Are you limited by technology? If someone could give you some magic new piece of technology, what would it be?
Well, they would make the USB work on a Gumsticks. We are currently, one of the other projects we're working on at the moment is real-time audio processing, which I am going to grab you about a little bit later. We're currently using Gumsticks, and we're making a work where the audience have headphones with microphones on the outside, and that's also GPS controlled. And the microphones pick up the sound from around you, and they remix that in real time into the sound of the music. And we're rethinking GPS control of audio at the moment. For people, I don't know how many people here have worked with GPS authoring systems for kind of make a sound play here, make a sound play here, these kind of pieces. One thing we're working on at the moment is scrapping that idea and working with GPS as a kind of heat map of data. So if you imagine you're controlling your sound variables in real time, and it's a sort of gradient type map, that probably didn't make any sense. What I mean is, if you imagine a heat map that gets redder and redder towards an area, as you walk towards that area, maybe the resonance on the violin increases, rather than it being walk to this area and it triggers this sound. But we've got a working system on Gumsticks at the moment, except that, yeah, building Linux kernels from scratch is not fun. I'm glad I have someone doing it for me. They're small, they're very expensive, similar to the kind of Raspberry Pi, but expensive and not quite as supported. But they're very small, and that's a benefit for us because we like discretion in our public spaces. So if we want someone to put something in their pocket, we don't want them to stand out. We just want them to look like they're. Our test boxes are pretty big, so little lunch boxes. They're a full platform. So the Gumsticks itself is I don't know what the proper word for it is, embedded computing platform, I guess. And then it has breakout boards for GPIO and USB and all those things.
Do you find, is GPS reliable enough? Because I don't use it that much, just Google Maps and Foursquare, about half the time.
We write for the vagaries of it. So having kind of used it quite a lot, what we tend to do is we write works that can deal with how flaky it is in a way, and we sort of build in error understanding both to the artistic composition. The sort of this string part has to stop here, and if the GPS doesn't stop it, we're completely screwed. So we have to build in things like that. But we also think a little bit about when is it actually useful. And when is it better to just play an MP3? Yeah. What are we gaining?
From your experience, what's the best way or most effective way for the public to engage or interact with your art, with your performance art?
With ours?
Yeah. What's the sort of best trick you've used it for?
What's the best? What is the best? We're rubbish at marketing. Our audiences always surprise us when we have big audiences. I think a mixture of Twitter and it's word of mouth. Do you know what it is? Two things. One is it's word of mouth, and the other thing is there's something about making works that the audience have a responsibility in putting on. That's something that I think definitely has really helped us with things like the subtle mobs and We Are For Us. The fact that you're saying to the audience, this isn't happening unless you actually do something. And that seems to work quite well for us, actually. If we're saying, this is dependent on you, it's not that there's a show just happening, and if you don't turn up, we don't care. It's not just that we'll be upset that you didn't come to see the show. The show won't actually happen unless an audience make it happen. And I think that's been quite useful for us. Yeah. I'm trying to think about Ghent. What happened in Ghent? I mean, thousands came. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know why.
Often it's sort of a few hours before the thing, a rumble starts happening. Everyone frantically tries to download everything.
Have you been working in Ghent?
Yeah, I live there now. But we're going to be around, so you can ask us more questions. And
anyway, that's all.
Do people pay to take part?
depends on the work or the venue. The subtle mobs we generally don't pay. People don't pay to take part. Yeah, it depends on the event. Actually, a lot of them we try not to, if we can, and then we do other things that are ticketed events through venues. So we kind of try and balance the two. Okay. Can I just pull this? Oh, I've just closed. That's not my computer. Sorry. I was going to...
Okay, so my name's Rob Tilson. Yeah, that should be long. Oh, God. Longer. That would be better. So.
Which box is it in? Was the question.
Dave's gone to find one, so don't worry about it too much. Okay, I'm Rob Tilson. I work for Code, which is the Cultures of the Digital Economy Research Institute here at Anglia Ruskin University. And I suppose I'm going to just tell you a little bit about Code. I'll talk a little bit about what Code do and how we aim to actually engage in research that bridges between cultural, creative and technical industries, and ideally get onto some case studies as quickly as possible. So what is Code? So Code is a research institute that's within Anglia, and it's there really to help engage between the academic staff from all the science and arts faculties and other faculties as well, to engage in research that's innovative by the fact that it's multidisciplinary, basically. We're just a small team of full-time researchers in Code, and then we kind of open out to the academics in the university, and we're able to draw people into projects as we need them, depending on their specific skill sets. And we have a number of emerging themes that we try to focus on, but effectively, like I say, it's focusing predominantly on collaboration between the arts and science faculties in Anglia Ruskin. I suppose one of our concepts of why and how we engage in this collaboration is that we sort of really appreciate, or we believe in, this codependency between technology and culture and creative industries, and we believe that actually technology defines sometimes the way we live, the way we act, and the types of creative output that we make, but equally the reverse happens as well. The way we act, the way we are, the things we want to do provides a mechanism, provides a justification for the development of new technology. So these two things really are codependent, and there's loads of examples through time of things. And for instance, supply for demand. This is pretty much where people say, "Hey, we want to use something in this way." I always say there's an example where a few years ago, a lot of people would walk around with a phone, a mobile camera, and an iPod all in their pockets, and they'd be loaded up. And so really, the sort of the smartphones that came around a few years back wasn't really that much of a technical leap. It was more a fact that actually the public were already waiting for it. They'd already decided that's the sort of thing they wanted. But this brings us some nice terms that I like bounding around. Technology reuse and misuse and abuse. Often we take a piece of technology and we say, I'm not going to use it for what it was designed for. I'm going to use it for something completely different. And actually justify a new development of a new piece of technology, things like playing guitar with electric drills and things like that. This sort of thing that people do, and eventually someone says, "Hey, I might build a product that actually makes that sound," and then I can market it. When we try to develop technology for a predicted cultural experience, sometimes that's very hard to predict. There's lots of examples of where people have developed technology and said, everybody wants this, and they develop it, Sinclair C5, something like that, and nobody wants it. So there's some very interesting kind of things we can evaluate as to how technology and creative use of technology sort of, like I say, keep this process going. So we try to engage in projects that, for one way or another, encourage this cycle of development and novel expression, I suppose. I've got a little collaboration matrix, which is that actually in Cambridge, we actually have all of this. We have technology experts, we have lots of cultural and creative experts, and we have lots of academic experts, and we have lots of industrial expertise. And actually, within this small community, and more nationwide as well, but within this small community, we try to collaborate in all directions, and this diagram is that really to say, actually, the more engaging projects are the ones where we can really combine industry and academia, science and art, and develop some exciting projects. But it's not just limited to these two fields. Often we find that actually collaborative research, collaborative projects that move into, so technology for healthcare, technology for finance, using art within healthcare and things like that. These are interesting projects so it's not just limited to these two fields. My background is in these two fields, really, so that's usually where I kind of focus. So I wanted to give you some case studies. That's the interesting bit, really. So this is a case study, a couple of projects that I'm working on. And again, my background's predominantly in electronics and music technology. So a lot of my projects that I work on are in the kind of audio field. This is a project for developing technology for music therapy. So music therapy between a therapist and, say, an autistic child is usually conducted with a piano or with a drum, and those two people will interact in certain ways for therapeutic gain. And there are significant advantages of adding another instrument to that list, an instrument that is based on technology purposefully designed for that. And this is quite interesting because it just takes in a number of different little technologies. So we spoke to some music therapists, and they said that actually children, they like using their hands. And if we can create two sensors which people can interact with, we can develop some interesting kind of possibilities. So this is an embed. There's an embed in there which Chris has told us about. I develop predominantly my electronics with embeds at the moment. And this is conductive ink. So this is ink that conducts, and actually it acts like a bit like a theremin. It detects the human body, and the human body acts as a capacitor, and basically, so it can detect when you place your hands on the different places. This then sends a load of serial data to a PC or a Mac, which is running, in our instance, Super Collider, and makes sounds. Not just based on that makes one sound, that makes another sound. We've actually developed a state-based system, so that the order of which the hands are put down, if you put two hands down and at the same time within a certain window, creates different sounds. So hopefully to generate an interesting interactive experience. So let's see if we get any audio when I play this. Oh God. Let's just try a different cable. Which would be good. Okay, let's go back to the start. So these are our pilot studies. These are research fellows that we've done a pilot study, and we're looking to turn this into a bigger project. I don't know why this is happening. Sounds like a ground issue. So these are people just playing with the system, learning the system, and I mean, those two people had never met each other, but basically by sitting them in front of this very simple device, we get some interesting engagement between the two people. There's another one here which I just wanted to show as well. I still apologise about the audio. It's a real shame. Where they're using it wrong. But that's what people do. They're misusing it. They're abusing it. They're using two hands, and they're only supposed to use one hand each. And I just think that's interesting because, whatever you give people, they will use it in a different way. That's just what people do. And so we're designed for that. And I think they had what we call a pivotal moment where where I don't know what happened. Something happened, and they, you know, they. Wow. But that's really what this is designed for. It's designed. That's a success in a therapeutic environment, because what the therapist wants is for the patient to actually suddenly have that moment where they will have some real benefit from what they're doing. So I don't know. We're now analysing these tapes to see exactly what's going on and how we can turn that into a more therapeutic context. I was going to show you this, so let me put this on as well, but it depends a bit on how good the audio is. Let's take that out of there and put it in here. Indicates it's my laptop that's making the noise. So, this is an embed. I just wanted to show you this because I was working on it last night, and I think it works. So this is a project which is part of the Visualise project at Anglia Ruskin, and effectively it's a project to use the conductive ink that I've already mentioned and actually paint a picture with that conductive ink, and then connect that conductive ink up to an embed, and so that people can touch the painting and it will generate sound. So the frame of the painting has speakers installed in it, and the painting itself is, and people are invited to touch the painting. So my role is the electronics geek on the project, and so these, let me switch on, see if we get any sound. We may not. Not getting any sound. Okay, typical. I'll leave that. But anyway, the point is that these devices will all connect to different bits of conductive ink on the painting. And so by touching the ink, so these are my test probes really, by touching, they will generate different sounds. And so actually, because again, this works on a capacitance principle, it means that you don't actually have to touch the painting, you just need to get close. So you can actually sort of wave your hands. Now, we haven't built the thing yet, so fingers crossed it will work better than it did just then. I'll get this fixed up. I've got some headphones, so maybe if anyone wants to play with it later, fingers crossed. Okay, how are we doing for time? I'm speeding on. I'll try and get through as quickly as possible. Actually, not much more to say. I was going to... the other thing is that... Ooh. The other thing is that we can record data. What are the benefits of technology? The benefits are we can actually take some data and actually capture the events that have taken place. So this is one of those events, one of those projects that pilots that we ran, and it shows what sounds were being made, what state the system was in, based on how people interact. And you can see here, took them a long time to realise that it would make these sounds as well. So there's some really interesting data we can analyse, and we can use that to actually go back and look at how a session went and maybe work out ways in which it can be improved. And equally, the technology allows maybe non-musical specialists to be therapeutic with their children, for instance. So you don't actually have to be a whiz on the piano in order to actually engage in music therapy with an autistic child or whatever, and allow that to be performed more often rather than their sort of 1 hour a week session or whatever. Just a couple more projects, a couple more case studies. This is just an audio fingerprint analysis case study. So if you've used Shazam, the package Shazam, which basically can listen to any audio and it can extract a fingerprint from that audio, go off to a database and come back and say, that was this song, and here's where you can buy it, basically. So I worked with a company to develop a sort of a similar system, and this is the audio which we can record in. This is effectively the fingerprint, which is a spectrogram with lots of points of interest, and basically you can take this effectively from here onwards. It's a normal fingerprinting database analysis operation, and we can go back. The thing is, that's kind of useful for selling music, but there are other places where this kind of technology is useful, not just in selling music. Actually, copyright protection, catalogues, creative tools, so you can find sounds that are similar. Have they got similar fingerprints? How can we use those maybe for DJing and mixing and things like that? Just out of interest. And equally, iPhone development projects. This is a project to develop a drum tuning program. Drum tuning being a little bit more difficult than guitar tuning. Guitars make very nice, easy to analyse sounds, whereas drums have got a very small window of sound. So there's a lot of acoustic analysis, a bit of engineering, understanding the acoustics of the drum, and then writing some software to engage in it. But ultimately, having to know what musicians want, how do people, you know, so it's engaging in a number of different sort of areas. So I will make one quick plug for my book, but basically it's Chris's book, really, because, you know, it's his device. So, but, you know, I've worked with Chris over a couple of years, really, on the embed, and we think this is the first academic book, anyway, on the embed, and hopefully will allow a lot of people to sort of engage a bit more in an academic context with the embed as well. So that's me. Any questions? It's a good question. Okay, apparently it's gone to print this week, so it's due out in August, but hopefully July. So it's, yeah, great.
Did you say you're around later on?
I'm here for a little while. Yeah, I won't be here all night, but I'll be here for a little while. So yeah, come and have a chat. There you go. Thanks.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk a bit about the internet and why it's less reliable than you tend to assume it is, but why you should embrace that and kind of work with it. So, so I build things. Of late, I've been building kind of mobile apps for cultural things, for games, for events, for kind of tour guides. So I've done a location-based game on the South Bank. I'm currently writing a visitor guide for Bletchley Park. And I had fun working on the second version of Take Trumps, the in-gallery game that Tate Modern have. And all these, what kind of links these things is, first of all, they're all mobile apps. And I like that because that's the device people have a kind of more intimate relationship with. It's the device they have with them all the time. It's the device they specifically have when they're usually out at cultural events or at locations like that. And I find that much more satisfying. And I also, all these projects use this, which was a map of the internet, not my brain, but the internet. And again, as we, you know, the reason we're here today is reaching out to the internet, you can do so much more. You can access data sets, you can run multiplayer games by coordinating with a server, and so on. And it's a really awesome thing to embrace. You can build great products using a combination of mobile and internet. The problem is we tend to think of the internet as something like water. You turn on the tap, data comes out. And I work, and a lot of the time that's true. So say 95% of the time that's true. But at 5% of the time, it won't work like that, and you'll be left scratching your head. And the kind of, what I want to kind of drill home is, if you think about it before you start, it doesn't really matter. But if you leave it till later, it's not a good idea. And mostly I'm going to talk about how I got burned so you don't have to. So South Bank. I like the South Bank a lot. One of the first kind of cultural things I did was a location-based game there called Time Trials. And we had lots of located facts about the Festival of Britain hidden on the South Bank. You had to go and find them, collect them. Points meant stickers. It was good. And we did lots of testing. Lots and lots of testing. It all seemed to be going fine. And then the weekend before, we were going to release this at the Hide and Seek Weekender on the South Bank, which is a games festival, which is good fun. We went the Saturday before to do one last test, and nothing worked. And everything looked like it should work, but it just stopped working. Why was that? And specifically, the thing that trips people up at this point is this here, and kind of this here, which is true but useless. So if you think of like this laptop, if I went to go to Amazon's website, what would happen using this laptop is, well, the data would go out over the Wi-Fi to the Wi-Fi base station over the local area network, which would then probably go over to the ISP, and then onto the backbone somewhere over by BT, I imagine, down to the London Internet Exchange, probably go across the water or under the water to America somewhere. But as you can see, this is a complicated path that all this data has to go to. All this says is that the signal between the phone and the antenna, be it a Wi-Fi base station or a cell tower, works fine. The rest of it, who knows? And what happens when we launch our game on the South Bank in the height of summer at a festival when there's thousands of people there, is that the cell tower works fine. But the problem is the link from the cell tower to the rest of the internet, it's like a road. You're trying to shove loads of cars down it, it gets congested and things stop working. And then people get confused because you haven't thought about this and therefore you're not telling people the right information as to how to recover from this. In Tate Modern, they kind of have the Wi-Fi infrastructure to support the Take Trumps game. But the problem is that's an open Wi-Fi network. And if you go in at the height of summer, it's full of tourists and students checking Facebook, and which then saturates the network. And if you go in at any lunchtime into Tate Modern and try to use the Wi-Fi, it's kind of flaky at times. And so, again, you need to plan for this. We have this notion of pipes, and pipes are quite reliable. You kind of put something in, and at a certain amount of time, it comes out the other side. But that's not true for the internet either. In that I did measurements, so this is something you really want to do, and surprisingly how few people do it, is if you're going to launch something big at a specific venue, at a specific time, go test at the point when you know you're going to launch it. So go out on a Saturday afternoon. I was kind of fortunate, you could tell from earlier. When I went to test my location-based game, it was a coincidence. I went out on a Saturday afternoon and happened to catch the cell phone network was falling over on a Saturday afternoon. But you need to build that into your planning. Don't just sit in your office. It'll work in your office because you've got good internet connection, you've paid for it. Go out there and test in the real world. So I've done measurements on Tate's network, and at peak times it takes 36 seconds up to get a packet from a mobile phone to a Google App Engine server and back again. That's not the kind of thing most people plan for. And better yet, the internet will proactively lie to you. So not just the content of web pages, but the actual infrastructure will lie to you. And it's designed to save you money. So if you download a web page on O2 on your over 3G, you'll notice all the images look awful. Now this is because they've recompressed it to make everything smaller for you, to save you money. But if you are, this doesn't actually inflict Tate Trumps, but it's the kind of thing you can imagine might, where if you're downloading gallery images and you want your gallery guide or whatever to look really good, to show off the artworks, having the network provider recompress those images and make them look awful isn't what you want. Similarly, the network might cache something. So if someone's asked for something recently, it will just give the same answer back to someone else. And in real-time games, that's an issue. And unless you remember to ask in the right way, to tell the network you really want an up-to-date version, you can have issues where you say, give me the latest state of the game, and it gives you the state 5 minutes ago, and that's absolutely useless. So you may be, at this point, thinking, bloody hell, I'm not going to do that. But the internet is a complicated thing, and there's kind of two things you can do about it. I mean, you shouldn't run away from it. You should embrace it. It is awesome for building these connected projects. You can build any other way. But when you start your project, and not after it's broken, stop and think, what am I going to do when things stop working? So there's kind of two approaches to this. The first one is the technical one, the nerdy one. And if you read a book on how to build internet programming, internet stuff, it won't tell you that O2 will recompress your images. It won't tell you that the local Wi-Fi setup is caching pages and feeding you old data. The only way to do this is to either get burnt or just assume it's going to happen, right? It's kind of an expect the unexpected thing. But that's kind of what I've done for the last 5 years as I've built internet things. And I've seen all manner of hideous things go wrong, and so I now know to defend against them. So when you're specifying your project and you're talking to your dev team, you want to make sure they're thinking on that lines. Because if they don't, you're going to let down your users. But I think the more interesting thing, and this is the thing I now do proactively at the start of projects, is you think, well, what are we going to do for the 2% when the internet doesn't work? What are we going to do when the user gets your app and the internet doesn't work the first time? So it's all right caching data, but what if you don't even get that chance? And there I think thinking about what you can do content-wise to build apps that deliver something else to keep them engaged, even if the internet connection is a meat of your product. So two examples of that is the new version of Take Trumps has a single-player offline mode. So if someone in Tate Modern downloads a Tate Trumps app, even if the network is hosed thanks to Facebook or whatever, accessing, it still provides value. They can still play their own game. It's not the great experience you want in Tate Trumps when you're in Tate Modern, which is running around collecting everything, but you still get value out of that. And for the Bletchley Park app, we're doing this tour guide. All that information is live because what's open in Bletchley Park changes day to day. There might be a wedding in that bit or so on. So the tour guides are fetched from the network. But if those fail, there's lots about Bletchley Park that doesn't change. Like Alan Turing's birthday doesn't change that often. So you can things like biography information or the history of the Enigma machine, kind of as static content in the app. So even if the network fails, the user still gets something out of the app. And we built the app from the start with that premise, even though the tour guide was the meat of the thing. So that was kind of just, you can get burned quite easily with the internet stuff. It's quite easy to forget that. But I think if you start your projects with that in mind, you can still deliver great things that will survive that. And these are the people who took all the pictures I stole off Flickr. So there you go. That's...
In terms of the value thing, which I completely agree with, I've been through that. Do you think there's a cut-off point in that idea of, okay, at this stage, if this doesn't work, we'll make it do this, so that gives the audience a certain value? Like, how far away do you feel that cut-off point is from the original?
I don't even think you have to give them equity value, equal value. All we really, in my mind, trying to do is stop them deleting the app.
Okay.
To some degree, because if I get an app and I can't use it, I'm just going to delete it. But even if it gives me a glimmer of value, I think I'm willing to give it a second chance. So
you come back to it when it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the Bletchley Park app, we've got quite a lot of content in there, but it didn't have to be that much. It just happened we had a great source of material we could pull upon. But I say it's just trying to give them some engagement, let them know that you care, and have thought that this might happen to them, so they're not feeling stranded. If anyone wants to know boring technical details about things that go wrong, I can bore people over beer at some point. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, so do you think your apps then should also explicitly kind of warn the user when stuff goes wrong? So if stuff is timing out, that it actually says, or is it just a case of, oh, this isn't working, I'll try the single-player game, or should it actually say, we're really sorry, this doesn't seem to be working at the moment?
I think there's a kind of case. So I think it very much depends on the app. So something like Tate Trumps, where the multiplayer app just totally depends on the network. If you can't get the network, there's no point even starting, and just be upfront about that. Something like the location-based stuff I tend to do. So a good example, I have a trail around the Botanic Gardens here that I put together at one point. Half the Botanic Gardens doesn't have cell phone coverage, but I proactively pull everything in on the off chance that you're going to wander into one of these areas. So I'm working behind the scenes. Even before you know you need that data, I'm pulling in as much as I can. If I see the network, I'll grab that data on the off chance I won't be able to get it later. And so if I can avoid burdening the user, I will. But at some point, you just have to be upfront about it. Thank you.
Because I'd like to blog about what you've talked about.
Hi everybody, my name's Jason Fitzpatrick. I'm Chief Geek at the Centre for Computing History. Just for my own interest, can I just see a show of hands for anybody that knows that name? The Centre for Computing History, not mine. Oh, quite a few. We're the, hopefully not quite there yet, but we're very nearly here. We're the newest, funnest and sexiest museum to come to Cambridge. And we are here to basically give everybody an idea, especially the younger generation, about where all this technology that this room is teeming with now in forms of mobile phones, computers and what have you, where it's all come from. And over what a very, very short space of time, it's gone from 0 to 100 miles an hour, and it's only getting faster. We do currently exist. We're actually in Haverhill, which is about 30, 40 minutes away. And it's quite small at the moment. We've got about 1,000 square feet of display area and a few machines out. But we've got about another 2,500, 3,000 square feet of really densely sort of packed storage area. And there are just boxes upon box of old computers, software, documentation, all sorts of things, anything relating to this story. That is, in fact, quite an exciting one that affects everybody. But you may have seen in the papers and on the web that we have got now the backing of Redgate software in Cambridge, ARM in Cambridge, obviously, and also Microsoft Research. And they're helping us bring the museum that we have in Haverhill to Cambridge. And last week, Monday, we got word from the City Council that we now have planning permission agreed on a 10,000 square feet building just off Coldham's Road near the Beehive Centre. So that place is now, well, it's not quite ours yet. We've got a sign on the dotted line, which is scary. But anyway, that place is ours to do with what we will, because we've got to fit it out a little bit and make it suitable for public use. But that's what's happening. We've done a lot. We might be sort of pretty new. We've only been going now for about 5 years. But thanks to the people that are involved in the project, volunteers and so on, we've done a huge amount of stuff. And we're really moving quite fast. We have set up, and all of this has been on our own backs. We've set up a project to take out a bunch of old computers and an old person to go out to schools and tell kids, just what has happened over these past sort of 30, 40 years. And we really look at things from our point of view. So rather than being all techie and this is a BBC Micro had 32K memory and it's really, that BBC Micro, and what did it do to the person that had it? And how did it change our lives? Because before that, not many of us had even seen or heard of a computer. So it's really more about us and our relationship with computers and how they've completely and utterly transformed the world that we live in irreversibly. So it's something that's has been a really, I can't even explain that the words sort of don't work for me about how much of a change this has been that we've just taken for granted. And we expect our mobile phones, as we've just heard, to get on the internet, and we expect to be able to talk to our nan in Australia. But the infrastructure that supports that's mind-boggling. And the technology changed from sort of 30 years ago, from 8-bit computers and 16K of memory to 64-bit computers and much more now with huge amounts of memory, has been staggering and a very, very short space of time. Kids don't get it. They just they know their PC. They call their PC Google quite often, which is scary. And they're amazed by all this stuff. And they laugh at the old games we used to play. But then actually once they start playing it and they start really, well, actually it's quite a good game. Then they start to have a little bit more respect for those things that have gone before. And then you start to have some really good conversations with them about how things have changed and what it means to us all. So the whole schools thing is important to us and is something that's moving on more and more. We've also done quite a lot of work with the TV and film industry in both documentaries and films and things like that. Just commercially supplying all this old gear that we have and that we've now sort of actively built another collection that is for them. But also to make sure that documentaries tell the right stories, and we work with filmmakers, documentary makers to advise on the accuracy and that sort of thing of various documentaries that have been out there. So things like Electric Dreams, which was about technology in the home, on BBC 4, I think, a while ago, which took technology from the 70s, 80s and 90s and just showed how it changed the dynamics of a family. That was quite a lot of our involvement in that. Films like Micro Men, lots of others. So that's another way that we can get out and communicate this sort of thing to people without necessarily needing to bring them to our small place in Haverhill. And we'll continue to do that. But we're also archiving and documenting all this history. So we have, I think, roughly speaking, very roughly speaking, about between 16,000 and 17,000 items on our website all documented. It is only in a fairly overview way. So you can go to our website and you can type in the name of an old game or the name of an old piece of software or computer, and it will tell you whether we've got it or not and a basic overview of it. But then if you want to do some research on it, you can come to us and we'll bring it out of storage and you can have a look. And there's not a lot online in terms of museums that have gone that far. So our catalogue of what we have is online, and as soon as we get it in, people can come and have a look at it online and research it. That's been quite a big part of taking up time and development. But we've also, rather than just cataloguing, we're also preserving on a bit level. So we use systems like cryoflux to take floppy disks and kind of take magnetic photographs of disks. Because you can't always copy a disk because people put copy protection on them in the first place, so you didn't nick them when they were selling them. But we need to preserve that. So we have a system called cryoflux that takes this photograph, magnetic photograph of the disk, and we back all this sort of thing up so future generations can, see what we were doing at that time and maybe, take something from that, learn from that. It's all been done so far on a completely voluntary basis. Nobody particularly gets paid for their work. It's all done for love. It's something we want to, as I say, bring to Cambridge. We are bringing to Cambridge, and hopefully you guys will maybe come and visit us just outside, like I say, of the Beehive Centre, so you can park there and walk around to us. So that's very briefly it. Like I say, it's a relatively new project, but it's got a lot of gusto. There's a huge amount of push coming from the people that are involved, and we hope to do something that really does befit Cambridge's part in this whole computing history story. Many of you know names like Acorn that have effectively gone on and created ARM, and Sinclair that went on to produce that C5 thing somebody mentioned earlier, which we've got two of, and lots of other names and things that were developed in Cambridge. Dragon 32 computer, well-known Welsh computer that was actually developed here. But anyway, so there's all these sort of names and computers that we've had from the past that we have got, and we are having on display. You can come and see them, play with them, interact. It's no good having one of these things just on the desk being a grey plastic boring case. You want to come and play those games that you played sort of 30 years ago. So that's what we'll be doing, and it'll be very interactive. So you're all invited to come and see us. Keep an eye on the website, which is www.computinghistory.org.uk. But more than that, come and play them in here in an hour's time or so. We'll have it all set up for you. Okay? Thank you.